4, 3.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Building Power, Grassroots Education Advocacy with me, your host, Zakiya Sankara-Jabar. And I am excited today to welcome someone that I have deep amount of love and respect for. Dr. Joyce King is with us. She is an expert in education and is a professor as well, teaching teachers how to teach our children in our schools. And so really excited to welcome you all here. Want to take a moment to just encourage everyone to like this video, make sure that you're sharing. We want everyone listening to this conversation today. We particularly want our educators, we want policymakers, we want people who love everything about education listening to this important discussion today. So make sure that you're liking, make sure that you're sharing. As always, we will be taking your questions, so please don't hesitate to post questions or comments in the chat on Facebook if you're watching live on Facebook, but of course for our audience on, on YouTube, but for our audience on Facebook, you can post questions right into the comments. So without further ado, I want to read the full biography for Dr. Joyce King. So since 2004, Joyce E. King has served as the Benjamin E. Mays Endowed Chair of Urban Teaching, Learning, and Leadership, and a professor of Educational Policy Studies in the College of Education and Human Development at Georgia State University. Previously, Dr. King held senior academic affairs positions as provost at Spelman College, associate provost at Medgar Evers College, CUNY, and Associate Vice Chancellor for the Academic Affairs and Diversity Programs at the University of New Orleans. She was the Director of Teacher Education for 12 years at Santa Clara University and the first head of the Ethnic Studies Department at Mills College. She completed 2 prestigious leadership programs, the American Council on Education Fellowship at Stanford University with the President and Vice President for Planning and Management, and the Office of Multicultural Development. As a W.K. Kellogg National Fellowship recipient, King also has studied women's leadership and grassroots participation in social change in China, Brazil, France, Kenya, Japan, Mali, and Peru. Widely respected in the fields of urban education and sociology of education, Dr. King's research has contributed to the knowledge base on preparing teachers for diversity and curriculum theorizing through her scholarship, Teaching Practice and Leadership. She served as a curriculum commission of the State Board of Education. Recent publications include the Harvard Educational Review, the Handbook of Research on Black Education, the Handbook of Research on Teacher Education and Voices of Historically and Contemporary Black Pioneers. In addition, Dr. King has organized and edited a landmark book, Black Education. That's my favorite, y'all. A transformative research and action agenda for the new century that was published by the American Educational Research Association. She has also served as a co-editor and top-ranked review for, she's lectured in educational and community organizations in the United States, Brazil, Canada, England, Mali, Senegal, Japan, Jamaica, and New Zealand. She has also shared her expertise in the diversity of transformation as training consultant in civic and human rights organizations and higher education institute in the U.S. and abroad. She's also been the president of the board of directors for Food First, Institute for Food and Development Policy in Oakland, California. And she is just a dynamic leader and visionary teacher. King has a wealth of academic, administrative, and leadership experience in public, private, and nonprofit settings. So clearly, she is highly qualified to have this conversation with us today. And I hope that everyone pulls up a chair or wherever you are, if you're looking on your phone, to just listen to this expertise that we have. And I'm just, again, honored that she agreed to join me today for this conversation. Thank you so much, Mama, Dr. King, for joining me. please tell us, I guess, introduce yourself. Anything that we haven't seen in this full big resume of all of your decades of lived experience and expertise in doing this work. What would you like to share with this audience that they did not hear in your bio?
Well, thank you very much, Zakiya, for the invitation to be here and to be with the educators and community people that are listening today. And this is such a serious time, and education is one of the most important resources and responses that we have available to us. So, I guess I think it's important to say that I was born and raised in California, and my family migrated to California in the 1930s. It was kind of like a Grapes of Wrath story. And I grew up with people who knew my mother as a child. So I am centered in a community and in a family tradition that is about people working, being proud, having dignity. And I was fortunate to get a scholarship to go to Stanford University, and the first in my family to go away to college. But I went at a time when, like now, there was a movement, the civil rights movement, profound social change was happening. So I found it necessary to stay connected to who I am. Whereas, sometimes our families think about get out, go to school so you can get away from here and you're going to make it, you're going to be successful. But I didn't have that attitude. My attitude was that I was sent and I was supposed to bring something back. So that's sort of a little bit more about who I am. And I'm a mother. I have two children who I am very proud of in terms of the work that they do. My daughter is a school principal and my son is an emergency room physician. And they grew up in East Palo Alto, California, at a time when East Palo Alto, which we call Nairobi, was the murder capital of the world, or murder capital of the US, let's say. So we stayed in the community. The children grew up there, but they did have a private school experience. So I've seen things from many different angles. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. That's critical because I think what shapes us is important. I know I have a story and what shapes me and why I do the work that I do and why I go so hard for our community, for our people, and particularly around Black education. So I think that's critical. And I appreciate you for sharing that experience. To that end, I feel like this is really a good segue because as you know, my partner and I, my husband and I, really him, took on this idea of culturally relevant curriculum. And this idea of African-centered education is not new. Many people, I would say, in our age group and current activists have not necessarily been a part of or have seen the full implementation. I can say not in my educational experience, K through 12. It wasn't until college that I was introduced to the idea of African-centered education and to scholars like you. I never heard about Dr. King, Molefi Asante, John Henry Clark, Asa Hilliard. I was mad when I got to college. And I was like, y'all been keeping away all this information from me? And my husband went through the same thing. You know, he actually, I'll share really quickly his experience. We're living in Dayton, Ohio at the time, which is where I co-founded Racial Justice Now. And when we started doing this activist work, particularly around Black education and how Black children are treated in these colonial outposts, as our brother James Ford down in North Carolina calls schools. But my husband was actually volunteer in a West Dayton school. West Dayton means Black Dayton in
I know a
Ohio.
little bit about Dayton.
Yep.
Did some work in Dayton back in the day.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Let's talk about that in a little bit. But he was volunteering at a school. The school is 99.9% African American. You probably can count literally on one hand, one or two white children, and certainly not a lot of other kinds of diversity in terms of other people of color. And he was in on a lesson, and the lesson was about genealogy, I believe in a fourth or fifth grade class. And all of the pictures, all of the curriculum was European. And he was like, what is this? You know what I mean? And that just triggered something in him. For him, it triggered his own experience of being one of those Black boys when he was in school, always getting in trouble. He can remember, I never connected to what I was learning.
Mhm.
And people miss that, Dr. King. People pathologize Black children. Oh, they bad. They acting up. They this, they that. And nobody looks at the system of education and how it's transmitted in communities of color, how it literally is a colonial education. And so I just talk a little bit about why African-centered education is important, and why should Black children in particular be the center and not on the periphery.
Well, like you said, this is not new. I always go back to Carter G. Woodson, and we'll talk a little bit more about his contribution, the book he wrote in 1933, Miseducation of the Negro. And I can share the same sentiment that you just expressed. I said that I went to Stanford University on a scholarship. When I got there, I was introduced to the Western civilization tradition. And then I happened to have the opportunity to go abroad on a study abroad experience. And I was in Italy, in Florence, Italy, when I first heard about the Harlem Renaissance. I was in a library in Florence, Italy, reading about the Harlem Renaissance in Italian. So I was just like you. What? What? And I'm supposed to be at one of the best universities in the country, you know? So that period of time was when Black students like me all over the country stood up and said, we must have a different type of education. But that was not the first time that we've asked for that. So one of the problems is that we have not systematically passed on the experiences and the knowledge that is a part of our tradition. So that's why your work and other people, using technology to really step outside of the system and make sure that we have a liberation space to address the questions that are important to us. Now, one of the things you asked me about African centered education, centering any student in their own experience is just what human beings need. So we're not doing something um, that is so strange and exceptional. We're just being human and saying this is who we are, and our children should know their own culture. They should know the cultures and backgrounds of other students as well. But the system of education has not been designed to free people. The system of education has been designed to maintain that system, and that includes a lot of bias and misinformation in what is taught. It's not just about K 12 education, but it goes to the university, because the people who develop the curriculum and the textbooks are using knowledge that's validated in what we call the academy. That's the Department of History, the Department of Political Science, the Department of Sociology. So as a student, I experienced that problem in my education. And that's what drove Black students in the 1960s to say, we want Black studies. So African centered education is an extension of that movement, and knowledge moves. It doesn't stay static, it goes and develops just like people. So the terminology of African centered education is something that we can recognize more recently, but the philosophy, the idea of excellence for people of African ancestry, we can take that all the way back to ancient Kemet. So we have to be able to see ourselves, as Dr. John Henrik Clarke has said so eloquently, on the map of human geography. We should be able to place our story in a larger story. And as Baba Asa always said, it doesn't begin with slavery.
No, that's exactly right. It does not begin with slavery. And I think that's important to, yeah, because Black History Month is so problematic in a lot of these schools. I swear the kids only learn about Martin Luther King, and nobody else ever um, did anything of importance, in these schools. So at any rate, I think that we have some information to share with our audience, and would like to queue up our PowerPoint here, because you have some particular, this is not just talk for you. You study this, you're an expert, you've created theories, you're teaching other educators or teachers that or students in your classroom who want to be teachers in the K through 12 system. And so I love to be able to have an opportunity to share that with this audience. And if we can get that pulled up, and maybe Dr. King, you can share with us a little bit more about that work, some of your experience with being in higher education, and just share a little bit more, I guess, if you haven't shared it already, the terms of the inspiration around some of the theories that you've created.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So I believe it's up, it says. Okay.
I'm not seeing it yet.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh, it's up now. So I think you have to see it on your end, and you can look at it on your end and then just go through it, but it's up for the audience.
Okay, so I can't see it at all, so I'll let you manage the moving of the slides.
Yes. Yeah. It's up now.
Okay.
If you have the slides up, so it's just showing, I believe the first one here says Black Education Healing the Pandemic and Toxic Curriculum Violence is the first slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the title of this presentation that I gave recently at the a Black Education Network
Right.
Teacher Institute at Stanford University last month. And
Right.
so this notion of curriculum violence is what
Yes.
we're sort of centering in on. And I credit Brother Greg Wiggin at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, for bringing that concept forward. He has a book about curriculum violence. That's Wiggin, Wiggan. And I would recommend his work to people. So let's go to the next slide. It says the AERA Commission on Research in Black Education.
Okay, we're pulling it up now. Yeah.
I was the 2015 president of the American Educational Research Association. And for people in the university and education, professors, AERA is like our professional association. It's where we go to give our research. It has 25,000 members worldwide, and it's sort of like the Cadillac of education research for people across the disciplines, whether it's history, counseling, sociology, psychology. That's the big association. Now, some of us have affiliations in other associations. Black psychologists, for example, have the Association of Black Psychology. That's not what this is. This is the quote unquote mainstream. So in 1999, this association, to solve a political problem, established the Commission on Research in Black Education. And the picture you see there is the book that you said you like. So the commission's work covered a number of years, and we did a lot of things. We had papers presented, we had conferences, and it ended up with this book, which is contains an agenda for researchers and educators working together. And I was the chairperson of the commission. I want to say something about how we work within these institutional settings. So, there was a hot potato. They came to me and asked me if I would chair this. And I think I was invited to chair this commission because of the work I had previously done in California when I served on the curriculum commission. And there was another hot potato with the textbooks. It was a controversial textbook adoption, history, social studies. So I agreed, but I said I will chair the commission if I can do it in a culturally centered way. And so I said, from the perspective of my culture, we start with the elders. And so we established an elders council with Dr. Adelaide Sanford, Baba Asa, and Edmund Gordon, Dr. Edmund Gordon. There were others on the elders council. We also included a brother who was a Afro-Puerto Rican. So the elders set the tone for what we were doing. And I put this book in my presentation just to underscore again that these initiatives happen continuously through time. So this book came out 15 years ago. And some people really swear by it. They're using it in their classes. I get notes from doctoral students who say, this book helped me get through school. I mean, so anyway, it's about using the knowledge, not just putting something together. And I want to call attention to one chapter in the book, if anybody's interested in getting the book. In Detroit, maybe I can't remember the date exactly, but the Detroit public schools were one of the first schools to be taken over by mayoral control. So we have a chapter in the book that is a transcript of a meeting we convened in Detroit with people who were involved in the public schools, who were involved in the university, who were activists, talking about excellent education in Detroit, pushing back against this takeover of mayoral control. And Grace Boggs, who was one of my mentors, was one of the conveners for that meeting. So in that particular chapter, it's called a Detroit Conversation, you have my philosophy of education. There are educators from the university, there are activists, there are parents, there are people who are doing innovative things, all in conversation to say, what is it that is the problem and what do we need to do? And so I've always maintained that relationship between the knowledge of the university and the knowledge in the community, bringing us together so that we can work together. As that's not the Western way, but that is our way. And that was my grandmother's way. She told me, don't go off to college and come back an educated fool. So how do you prevent that? You stay connected to your community. So a point here on this particular slide, there's a quote from Walter Rodney, who people may not have heard of. He was a Black scholar from Guyana, an activist who wrote a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And I love this quote because it expresses what we are experiencing when we go into these educational settings. He explained the importance of distortion in scholarship. In other words, you think you're getting knowledge, but you're actually getting somebody else's ideology, somebody else's point of view. And he said that it was necessary to come to grips with the way in which one's being and the presentation of one's being was so hopelessly distorted by the sources to which one went for scholarship. Now, you're a learner, you're a student, you're seeking knowledge. And when you get the knowledge in your hand, it's telling you something bad about yourself, your mama, your whole community, but that's the knowledge that you're being presented. And so that's the distortion that we are struggling to overcome, that we are overcoming when we say we embrace Black studies, an African-centered education, and other communities are doing the same thing. You have Native Americans, you have Chicano, you have women, you have progressive white people trying to come out from under the weight of this distortion. So let's go to the next slide.
Okay, yeah, we are pulling up the next slide now.
Okay. It should say education for liberation or miseducation.
Yes.
And I mentioned Carter G. Woodson.
Yes.
87 years ago, this is when Carter G. Woodson said this. And so the question is, are teachers studying Carter G. Woodson in their teacher preparation programs?
Can I interject really quickly? I have to tell this story. So Carter G. Woodson, his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, was one of the books that Racial Justice Now, and really led by my partner, my husband, fought for to have included in the high school English language arts curriculum in Dayton Public Schools.
Mm-hmm.
We got the school board and the policy committee to accept it. Do you know when it was ready to be rolled out to the schools and the students? Teachers said the children are not ready for this. They're not, this is too difficult. And then some teachers flat out just said that they were uncomfortable teaching it, that they felt like it would create political upheaval among the students and the community. And we thought that's the whole damn point. Yes, but I just had to caution it. But you're right. 87 years ago, literally, he could be saying the same thing today. But
So
please go ahead.
What he did, he he epitomized the liberation spirit because he was a scholar. He had been a professor at Howard University, and he stepped out of the academic domain in order to do the work that he did, documenting African-American history, African history, but he was also a businessman. He created his Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. He created Negro History Week, which wasn't just a week of celebration, but it was the culmination of a year's work in schools using the curriculum materials that he developed. He also sold his books door to door and trained people to go into the community and talk to our families to say, why do you need Black history? So, I mean, he was one of those people that we really need to study and pay attention to in terms of how he responded to the challenges of his day. So this is a quote that I think we really can use as guidance. And I kept his language, his way of speaking in here. He says, it may be of no importance to the race to be able to boast today of many times as many quote unquote educated members as it had in 1865. In other words, we shouldn't be bragging that we got more people graduating, more people quote unquote successful. If they are of the wrong kind, this increase in numbers will be a disadvantage rather than an advantage to the race, to us as a people. Are these quote unquote educated persons actually equipped to face the ordeal before them, or will they unconsciously contribute to their own undoing by perpetuating the regime of the oppressor? Period.
That's what we got. I don't understand how we can say that that's not currently what is most prevalent. Mm-hmm. Listening to what you're saying and me living as a current parent with children in schools and as an activist and organizer, those words ring so true for me today.
So it's not about the skin color. It's about the thinking and who are you here for? And that's a critical question that we have to ask of ourselves and anybody else. So I teach my students that everybody has a stake in this. If you're white, if you're Latino, if you're Puerto Rican, if you're Dominican, what is the agenda for you as a human being? And what are you representing in your practice? Who are you here for? And so we don't have to condemn anybody, but we ought to be able to recognize who is who. And that's been going on all the time. It's nothing new in that. Don't have to be mad about it. You just say, okay, I got you. Thank you very much. So let's go to the next one, please.
Yes, ma'am. We're pulling it up now.
So, we've just had the eruption of international movement around the killing of George Floyd. And this was a New Yorker magazine cover that came out. And if you get that magazine cover, you can see that there are many faces embedded in this image. And the artist is reminding us of the historical nature of our struggle. And again, Woodson, there would never have been any lynching in the street if it did not first take place in the classroom. So now that's about how the education system prepares the society for the way we are treated and prepares us. If you read more of Carter G. Woodson, he said, you know, some quote unquote Negroes, when they find that they have to go to the back door, if they even get a chance to go in the front door, they so uncomfortable, they will go make a back door for themselves to go in. So that's how we are also affected. And I just tell people all necks are on the line. We're all in this together, and there's something for everybody to do. So my students, when I was teaching at Santa Clara, I was director of teacher education at Santa Clara University for 12 years in what we now call Silicon Valley. It's a Jesuit school. In the 12 years that I was there, I had one Black student and one Asian student who was trying to pass as, now he was a Chicano and he was trying to pass as Asian. So my students would tell me, well, Dr. King, all this talk about racism, it's just human nature. Prejudice is just human nature. We can't change it. And so I would tell them, I think humor is important. We use humor to show that we're human. So I would say to them, well, you guys are giving me the George Clinton Parliament Funkadelic theory of human behavior. And this is the song from the Atomic Dog. Why must I feel like that? Why must I chase the cat? It's just the dog in me. And so, you know, that's a way of saying there's nothing for us to do if that's what you believe. If you think this is human nature, why are we here? We need to just go home. So that was my way of getting them to understand some of the assumptions behind their statement that this is just human nature. No, racism is not human nature. It's learned and it's systematically taught. Everybody can be prejudiced, but that's not what racism means. And so part of the task for all of us is to really learn, what is structural racism? Where did it come from? How is it sustained? And what is our ethical obligation as educators to do something about it? So
No, that's exactly right, and I think that's interesting. I've heard professors like you and other professors that I know that I'm close to. In fact, my co-founder of Racial Justice Now is Dr. Vanelia Randall. She is a law school professor over at the University of Dayton School of Law, and she caught hell in that law department, not just from students, but even from some of her colleagues, in terms of introducing these ideas that you're saying that you're talking about, and trying to teach the next generations of lawyers and teach the next generation of professionals, how do you combat racism in your professional lives. And so it's always been disheartening to hear some of those stories, particularly, you know, some of them, you know, come from other people of color, but white students and even some Black students come in there and they're completely, you can tell they ain't never had no African-centered education. They've been completely like the movie Get Out, like where they were showing how you replace the brain, but their brains have been socially conditioned as replaced.
well,
And
there's a lot of reward for that, a lot of success for that. And so we are in a society that selects people that they want to uplift, who articulate those motives and those values. And so we have to just recognize that we come from a different tradition and that we have other options. And so you just do what you do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know we're going to go to the next slide, but I wanted to, we got one question from the audience. So I want to keep encouraging people in the audience to send us questions. We're loving the feedback so far. Thanks so much for your comments. Well, one of the questions, it says, when or how do we begin to scale up our options and place African-centered education in our communities? And I hear that all the time. You know, so I'll tell you, there's a couple of camps. There are people who are like, F the extra, the traditional school district. We're not going to get these people to move. They control it. Let's start homeschooling collaborative. Let's start Saturday schools. There's people who are saying, okay, I have to send my children to the traditional schools, but I will supplement. You know, if you had to offer some practical solutions to this person that's asking this question, what are some of the things we can be doing, I guess, as a community and supporting each other to scale up African-centered education so that we don't have the Candace Owens of the world?
Well, I think my answer is all of that. I don't see that it's possible to do a either or strategy because when we, several colleagues and I, Deborah Watkins and Dr. Ivor Carruthers, we convened a Black Education Congress in Chicago. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Elaine Mosley from in Chicago, answered that question this way: we need to educate our children wherever they are. So if you're in a homeschool and you have some wonderful resources, or you're in an African centered school, maybe you can find a way to share that with some of the people who are working in the public schools. In other words, it's all of us all the time. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, ma'am.
So the next slide, I want to try to speed this up a little bit because I think we're going to run out of time if we don't.
Yes, ma'am. Let's go. This is good. The people are engaged, by the way. We have lots of people watching, and I'm seeing the comments kind of come in. So okay, they're engaged. This is good.
So this next slide is really about I think you wanted me to tell this story. And what I put here is using our culture to resist propaganda. We have knowledge and traditions to resist in a way that is affirming who we are and not draining our energy just in a fight mode. So when we look at what is being offered, one of the things that's most damaging, when I say curriculum violence, this is one of an example of that, where we're taught the Africans sold their own brothers and sisters into slavery. So that's a partial truth. It's very complicated because it contains a serious distortion. I don't have time to go into it right now, but if you get some of my books or some of the things I've written, there is a way to understand what is wrong with that idea. But what it does is it wounds us, keeps us from feeling good about ourselves as Africans, and divides us so that we think we are a minority as opposed to people with a global identity, as Dr. Clark said on the map of human geography. So I produced work around the notion of diaspora literacy. That is, that we should be able to recognize ourselves wherever we are in many different cultural contexts. And I also coined the term disconscious racism. And that's, when I was teaching in Santa Clara and I told you what my students were saying and how they were thinking, I had to try to name this phenomenon because they would say, well, it's just unconscious or it's just prejudice, but it's not unconscious. It's very conscious unwillingness to think that is the product of miseducation. So there's a cause and there's a solution. So that's one of the things. If you Google my name, you'll see disconscious racism. And there's a longer definition of it and all that. But short and sweet, it's a habit of mind. It's a way of not thinking about information that you don't have. And even when the information is provided, you can't accept it because your mind is already closed down by the miseducation you've experienced. And there's an ethical component to this because if you are resisting that aspect of reality, you don't feel compelled morally to do anything. So I'll give you just this example of what happened to me 50 years ago when I was an undergraduate in a class, taking a theory class about motivation. And the professor was teaching us about motivation to succeed or motivation to achieve. And he said, I was the only Black student in the class. And he said, you can understand why Native Americans are poor and on the reservation because they don't have the motivation to achieve in their culture. And the proof of this is in their fairy tales. And so he used the fairy tale, the Native American tale about Coyote. Coyote is a trickster figure in Native American folk tales. And we have a cartoon about Coyote. I used to see Coyote when I was growing up. Coyote never wants to work. He's always trying to do some tricks or something. And so here's my professor telling us that that's proof that the Native Americans are on the reservation and poor because there's something lacking in their culture. And our assignment was to use his theory in a paper. So I told you I was connected to my community. I felt assaulted by this, not because I'm Native American, but just think about what is being taught here. So I left the university and went to East Palo Alto to the community library, and I collected folk tales from the European tradition, Grimm's fairy tales, Mother Goose nursery rhymes, and African American folk tales. And so there was a formula, a statistical formula that we were supposed to use that he had presented in class. So I converted that formula to my own purposes, and I gave a score of 1 to 10 for motivation to achieve in European folk tales and nursery rhymes and African American folk tales. So, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. What's the score? 0. Mary Had a Little Lamb, Mother Hubbard, who was that sitting on the side and the spider came and frightened her away. Okay, all these folk tales in the European tradition using that formula, motivation to achieve, 0. So then I went to our tradition, using our culture to resist this propaganda. And I picked the story of Brer Rabbit and Brother Fox. So Brer Rabbit was always dissing the fox. He's chasing the fox, giving the fox a hard time. And one day Brer Rabbit tripped and the fox grabbed him. He said, "Oh, I got you now and I'm going to eat you tonight." So Brer Rabbit said, "Oh, Brother Fox, whatever you do, just don't throw me in the briar patch. You can cook me in the pot. You can do anything, but just don't throw me in the briar patch. We're dealing with a trickster." So the fox said, "Oh, the briar patch. That's just what I'm going to do." So he throws Brer Rabbit over the fence. Brer Rabbit is jumping up and down, saying, "I'm home. I'm home." Motivation to achieve, 10. So I wrote up my paper, used my statistical formula, showed who got 10 and who got 0, and I got an A. 7 years later, when I was at Santa Clara on the faculty, the woman who was the teaching assistant in that class was also on the faculty, and we were at a faculty party together, and she came up to me and she said, "Hey, Joyce, do you remember that paper you wrote for Professor so-and-so's class?" I said, "Yeah, I got an A." She said, "We always wondered if that was your own work."
Wow.
So
Wow.
this curriculum violence is not just in the materials, it's in the thinking and in the way that educators look at us and look at our children. They couldn't imagine that I had thoughts independent of what they were teaching. But this was the era of Black studies. This was when we were able to question the kind of miseducation that we were receiving. So we have to know our cultural tradition in order to use it that way. So we can move on to the next one.
Next slide. No, that's a powerful story. I love the fact that I've had different experiences in class with professors. I love the fact that your professor you actually followed the directions, but he didn't expect you, like you said, to use your own culture and the ingenuity and to understand, to create that, to give an A. I've had experiences where professors would, especially because I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to openly challenge, in front of the whole class. I probably should have just wrote it down and they could give me a good grade. But I was always questioning, like that Socratic kind of just questioning. If something don't sit right in my spirit, I question. And on the last show last week, I talked about an experience sitting in a women in gender studies class, and that particular professor, I just questioned some of the things that some of the narratives that she was using, particularly about Black men and things like that, that just didn't sit right in my spirit and didn't feel comfortable coming from her as a white woman. So I've certainly had those experiences as well as a college student. But yes, let's look at the
move
next.
on to the next one. So this is important. I have a picture here of the historical community, the Black community in St. Paul, Minnesota, which was known as Rondo, but it doesn't exist anymore. So many of our communities have been gentrified or removed or disappeared, and we don't even know that they existed before. And they put these freeways in almost all across the country, destroying Black communities. So here we have some of the images that the young people are portraying in this George Floyd moment in the movement. We are not our ancestors. And so the Black Youth Project, which is a very powerful organization coming out of Chicago, the work of Kathy Cohen, a professor of political science, wrote an article challenging this expression, saying that the young people are actually insulting their ancestors because they don't know the story. And the reason they don't know is because they haven't been educated. And Hollywood, you can't depend on Hollywood to tell our story. So this is just a reminder that what the young people who challenged these images said, many of us only know the portrait of docile Negroes. Saying I'm not my ancestors blatantly disrespects how they lived and died for us. And so we have a resistance tradition. We also have a tradition of people accommodating, but that's just human beings. But we have to try very hard to know our full story, not just a part of it. So let's move to the next slide. Again, a document that's very important from 1984. Dr. Donald Smith, the late Donald Smith, was president of NABC, and he commissioned a particular study that Asa Hilliard and Barbara Sizemore produced, Saving the African-American Child. And one of the quotes from this document says, "We believe that all American children will be better served by an education system which is based on the goals of academic and cultural excellence." So academics, yes, but we also have to keep our culture intact and understand that we are about being educated for our community, for the benefit of our people as well. Now, that's a choice everybody won't make, but that's my choice. And I think that's what African-centered education is all about.
Can you tell us what NAPSI is? What does that stand for?
Oh, the National Alliance of Black School Educators.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted the audience to know what that meant.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you want to, this animation is 3 minutes, but
yes,
see if you have time to play it. If not, we can.
Yeah, we definitely have time. Let's go ahead and pull up the animation here. And thank you so much for sharing these slides and this information. Hopefully people have taken screenshots, but they can also just go back and watch this video. It will be saved for everybody. This is also a moment I want to just encourage everyone to continue posting your questions and comments in the chat. Continue liking, of course, and sharing the video out in your networks. We want, to hear from you while we have this brilliant scholar here with us, and hopefully we can get to as many questions with her as possible. So again, comments, questions in the comments section, and we will be playing a video here for you shortly, a short 3-minute animation. It should be coming up here pretty soon.
Internationally distinguished educator and Stanford University graduate, Dr. Joyce E. King holds the Benjamin E. Mays Endowed Chair at Georgia State University.
Well
the American Educational Research Association's 2015 president. Dr. King's numerous publications, including Black Education, the landmark book she organized, document how researchers and schools that are failing Black students can reverse this injustice. Dr. King grew up in a working-class Black community in Stockton, California, surrounded by the life-affirming sounds of gospel music and the blues. Her church members marched for their civil rights. She brought her spiritually fortifying cultural heritage along when she went to Stanford during the tumultuous 1960s. Though few in number, Black students across the USA resisted inaccurate Eurocentric historical narratives and education for assimilation. While James Brown sang, "I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door, I'll get it myself." That's exactly what her generation did. Dr. King earned her doctorate in 1974. And the Black Studies movement inspired her commitment to liberating education in the Black intellectual tradition. Dr. King's research and teaching in university and community settings remember students' culture and heritage knowledge, which curriculum bias erases. Teaching diaspora literacy consciousness using Sangoi, African language and history counters miseducation and anti-Blackness, enabling students to see themselves in the world through their own cultural lens. Her concept of disconscious racism continues to impact research and teacher preparation for racial social justice. Calling for an African-centered, reparatory justice curriculum to rewrite knowledge across the academic disciplines for human freedom. Dr. King engages her graduate students, other educators, and community learning partners in the USA and internationally in transformative research and pedagogy for partisanship that challenges the existing educational system.
You're on. You're live, Zakiya.
All right. Wow. That was a very powerful video. I'm looking at some of the comments coming into the chat, and I have to share this one with you. Somebody said, I'm so glad I stumbled in here. Look at God. Great information. I'm learning so much. and exactly that, to me, that is what I want in this program. This program, I titled it Building Power Grassroots Education Advocacy, because to me, this is what this platform is all about. It's about using the technological tools that we have in front of us to break out of the kind of colonial, where information is only for certain people who can afford it, or it's elitist, that kind of thing. And the fact that we have scholar activists like you, people who love us, willing to come on and share the level of expertise that you have. Like, you are the expert. You were the president of ARA. You've done all of that in quote unquote their systems, and you are respected, and they better respect you, but also willing to talk to your people, talk to people at the grassroots level, talk to parents who are just looking for answers, right? I hear so many stories from parents who are fighting in schools because some of the curriculum are showing videos. There's a group in Minnesota, I learned that there was a video teaching about slavery, and it was an animation, and it showed that in order for the slaves to get free, they had to be congenial and agree with white people, and they had literally little kids socializing them. Think about this, mama, socializing them to be congenial, agree with white people to get to the next step. And I said, if that is not, that's such a subtle way of reinforcing our inferiority and reinforcing their power. And so that is why this whole grassroots building power piece is important, is because we have to build our own power. As you said, we have to teach our children, where they are. I want to read this question. We are at the moment in the program where we're going to be reading questions from the comments. And this is a question that just came in for us, Mama Joyce, and let me read it. It said, with all the school districts concerned about how to reopen in the midst of the pandemic, how can we ensure that this moment of reckoning in the wake of George Floyd's murder isn't a wasted opportunity in revolutionizing our curriculum? It says, I foresee obstinacy on the part of admins more concerned with operating schools, whether remotely or in person, safely, and forgetting the lessons from the ongoing unrest. That's a lengthy question.
Only thing that comes to mind is organizing.
Yep.
If you're not in an organization or organizing, I mean, that's what this moment is. It's about organizing. So we have to be realistic. Everybody isn't able to homeschool their children. Some parents will be relieved that they can send their children back to school. But I mean, this is a rock and a hard place moment. It's not safe.
Yeah.
So we're facing the same thing at the university. All across the country, universities are trying to cope with the dollar, you know, uh, the business side versus the safety side. And unfortunately, we have an administration that is not being responsible when it comes to safety. So what do people do when they are being oppressed and um, threatened?
Yeah.
Organize.
Yeah, Stokely Carmichael. I see you, Kwame Ture, channeling organize, organize, organize. That's it. That's what he called us to do. He said we're not necessarily outnumbered, we're out organized. And I think that unfortunately that part is still true. Here's another question, and you know how it is when somebody starts off respectfully, but I'll read it to you anyway and allow you to respond. This question, I deal with this too, like an internal struggle. It says, respectfully, Dr. King posits the argument to abandon public education. I don't know that you do that, but abandon public education that is and has been offered but fall short to saying build your own institutions. Why is this? Are we too deeply invested in the existing system, or because we lack the resources to be successful in building alternatives? Do we lack the will, political, social, and economic will and power? There's a generation saying that they are exhausted by asking these oppressive constructs to relent.
Well, that's a
Wow.
question that has a lot of different positions embedded in it.
Yeah.
I never said abandon public education. I said do all of those things. And
Right.
those of us who have the resources to be helpful should be sharing and working with our children wherever they are.
Right.
Yes, this is a relentless struggle. I remind myself that Marcus Garvey didn't have a cell phone or a fax machine, but he
Amen.
organized the Black world. I remind myself that Du Bois walked down the street past the university where I teach on his way to the Atlanta Journal and Constitution newspaper to protest the way the newspaper had been fanning the flames of lynching.
Yeah.
And when he got to a shop window, he saw the knees of the Black man who had been killed the day before. His name was Sam Hose. He saw the man's knees in the butcher shop window with the rest of the meat.
Mm.
This is documented. Du Bois turned around, went back to his office at Atlanta University, and got back to work. So, we can be tired, we can be confused, but that's not going to change anything. So, if you check in your own family story, your own ancestral tradition, you will find inspiration for people who sacrificed for you to be where you are today. And that may give you the energy to get up again and do what you can do. But be careful not to put words in other people's mouth, because I didn't say that.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. And I wanted to read that to you to allow you to say just what you said. And I did not know that story about Du Bois. That definitely, wow. Just the savagery of people who could do things like that. It's literally in my mind inexplicable. I don't have that in me to do that to another human being. It's, anyway, it reminds me of Elijah Muhammad and some of his pronouncements that I won't repeat here right now. But this has been amazing. You are everything, Queen Dr. Joyce E King. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. We are at time. Thank you for sharing your PowerPoint, all of your brilliance. People, again, the vast majority of the comments are very appreciative. Someone said, "Teach, Joyce, so glad to hear you again." That was one of the last comments that we had here. So the vast majority of people recognize you and your brilliance and all the things that you've done to advance the cause of Black education and really the Black community writ large. I wanted to share there because one of the things that you talked about in your last comment was about finding inspiration by looking in your own family story and looking in your own ancestry. And that's actually something that my next week's guest, Baba Wakesa Mazimoyo and Afia, you know them. Those are my next week's guests on the Building Power series. And we're going to talk about all the amazing work. We're continuing this thing with educating our own. And so We'll talk about them running an online homeschooling collaborative before Zoom even existed, before all of this virtual learning even existed, and talk about what inspired them. So next week we'll have Wakesa and Afia Madzimoyo from the Aya Educational Institute. I'm excited to invite them and have them be a part of this and continue on with this theme of education and education for liberation. I also want to remind the audience as well that tomorrow we will be having another virtual town hall, and this town hall will be focused on reimagining safety in our schools and what safe schools actually mean. There is a robust police-free schools, counselors not cops kind of movement that's sweeping the country, being led by parent and young activists, Black folks, brown folks. Oakland, have to shout them out. Black Organizing Project, led by Black parents, have been working over the last decade to remove an actual police department of the Oakland Police Department within the school district, and they won that fight 2 weeks ago. So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow in the virtual town hall. It will feature my son, Amir, who is an up-and-coming budding activist himself. He'll talk about what safety means for him in schools as a young Black male student. We have an educator. We also have a partner from philanthropy, and we will hear from experts from youth justice organizing, Jonathan Stith and Harold Jordan from ACLU of Pennsylvania. So thank you for joining this week's edition of Building Power with Zakiya Sankara-Jabar, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mama Joyce. I appreciate you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Appreciate you too.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.